So thank you so much for joining me today, Michael, for the another episode of Tkachuk Immigration Podcast, immigration and everything else. Today we are talking about immigration in Canada, but also about immigration in Quebec specifically. So Michael, thank you once again. So could you please introduce yourself, tell me more about your profession and your practice, and just a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Michael Monfared. I am the owner of Immigration Michael Monfared. I've been in business since 2018. It was a business that I took over from my parents. And ever since then, I began working mainly in Quebec, since I'm located in Quebec, and I've been specializing in work permits in Quebec as well. So it's a job that's very fulfilling, very satisfying, and I love helping the people.
I'm actually glad to do the podcast with another RCIC, so we can relate to the similar experiences, right? And similar cases that we potentially deal with. And I was really happy to be introduced to you and to learn more about your expertise in Quebec immigration. Just to ask you a certain question, why Quebec is different? Why it's so complicated? Because every time I definitely don't deal with Quebec, right? But I just want to know from your perspective how Quebec is different.
Well, it all started with the Canada-Quebec Accord. When it comes to immigration, Canada allowed Quebec to choose its own immigrants. Which implemented a separate department of Immigration Quebec called MIFI, Minister of Immigration, Francization and Integration. And that department is free to choose their own immigrants, whether they be temporary for students and workers or permanent for permanent residents. If you're going to be settling in Quebec, you have to pass the Quebec process first before proceeding to the federal process in Canada. So it's mostly to conserve the French language here in Quebec and to make sure that the immigrants that they're choosing to either move here temporarily or move here permanently, respect the values and the way of life in Quebec.
Oh, that's very interesting. Who knows, maybe potentially Canada as a country will implement similar practice, because we are moving towards advancing a larger number of Quebec, French speakers in Canada, right? So Absolutely. That's an interesting concept. Yeah. However, can someone from, let's say, Ontario move to Quebec?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Someone from Ontario can definitely move to Quebec, and it's not really dependent on language when we're talking about temporary immigration. Mm-hmm. If someone's coming here to study for school, we have English schools, so they could just present an English language exam and be admitted to that school. Or if they're coming to work, there are many employers that require English workers as well, or a lot of trade jobs don't even require a language either. So it's definitely possible to come here temporarily as a English-speaking person, but when it comes to permanent residence, it's a different story.
It's a bit different, right? I have a few clients that actually were asking me about the Quebec immigration, and specifically what I seen. Some people go to Quebec for seasonal work, right? So maybe you can tell me more about a seasonal LMIAs, right? Or even a 2-year LMIAs. What's the difference? And as you said, it might be a language thing, but is there something else that employers and candidates should know?
Well, in general, in Quebec, we have a different way of doing LMIAs. We have something called the simplified process. And the simplified process is a list of occupations that are in demand here in in Quebec. So the ones that are in demand are exempted from a lot of LMIA requirements that you find for the rest of Canada. For example, if someone is hiring a job that's in demand, whether it be in the agriculture sector or in the manufacturing sector, the employer doesn't have to do the advertisement. They could proceed directly, no advertising at all, so and they could proceed directly to the LMIA application, because Quebec realizes that by prolonging the LMIA application, by doing the ads, they're giving more challenge to the employer to have that worker come to Canada faster. So it's Quebec doesn't have the same way of doing LMIAs, and it's proven to be very beneficial, and a lot of employers have been enjoying it.
It's very interesting because in general LMI application that I work, let's say in Ontario or Alberta and so on, we now have for low wage advertisement should be 8 weeks, right? And for high wage it still remains 4 weeks. For a month, right? So 4 weeks. And in addition, on top of that, the 10% cap is there too for the low wage LMIAs. So is it similar to the Quebec LMIAs? Could you tell me if there's also the cap that still applies to the province, or there are extra step?
No, they're definitely, it's pretty similar in that aspect. So if a job is not considered facing a labor shortage, that position is not facing a labor shortage in Quebec, then yes, they have to go through the LMIA, the regular process, like you said, 8 weeks low wage for a 1-year work permit, 4 weeks high wage for a 3-year work permit. But the thing is that people ultimately, the employers will eventually have to go through that process if they want to hire there, and they do have to follow the regular federal rules. There is that extra step of applying for the CAQ, which is a Certificat d'Acceptation de Québec, Acceptation Certificate of Quebec, which allows the person to remain here temporarily. So, but we also have other requirements that are not the same. For example, in the rest of Canada, when you're hiring in a position, you have to offer the median wage, right?
Yes.
But in Quebec, the wages are determined by NOC code. So every NOC code has its own salary presented, and the salary is also determined on the amount of work experience that the employer requires. So just give an example, if a company is hiring a welder and they require 0 to 2 years of work experience, then I would refer to the column in the sheet that says, okay, then the person could have, for example, $30 an hour. But then the next column says, if the employer requires 2 to 9 years of work experience, then the salary gets increased to $40 an hour. And if they need 9 or plus years of work experience, then it gets increased to $50 an hour. So not only do we have our own way of establishing the salary for the temporary foreign worker, but it's much more detailed and specific because it goes by NOC and years of work experience required by the company.
That's actually quite interesting, right? Because when I'm comparing this to a regular LMI, let's say in Ontario, what we do, we just look for the median wage, right? So let's say if it's the same welder, it could be, I'm just approximately saying, let's say $30 an hour, right? So if, let's say, employer wants 5 years of experience, that could change that number completely, right? But in Ontario, we just say $30, right? Or whichever the wage employer prefers, if it's higher than median wage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For the processing time, would you say LMIAs for Quebec are faster than LMIA processing for the other provinces?
That's the golden age question. Okay, taking aside from advertising and everything, so once it's submitted, right? Because we have to do an extra step, like for the rest of Canada, you submit the LMIA, you wait for a decision before applying for the work permit. But over here, you have to submit the LMIA first, and then you have to submit the CAQ application. And the worker CAQ application is to make sure that the worker that was chosen can meet the requirements that are set out on the LMIA. So that's the portion I was speaking of for the beginning, saying that Quebec gets to choose their own immigrants. They have to, not only is the employer implied on the LMIA process, but they're also implied in the CAQ process. And the CAQ also involves the worker. So the processing time, we're looking at anywhere between 3 to 4 months right now. So I believe it's a little bit longer than the rest of Canada because of that Quebec process. And we have to deal with 2 ministry departments, not only Service Canada, but MIFI as well in Quebec. They have to collaborate together on every application, which in return increases the processing time.
Creates delays, right? It's very interesting because I think it's a great process to make sure that province gets a really right candidates and the proper assessment is done. Of course, if the rest of the Canada will be doing the same LMI, it will create a lot of delays in getting this LMI approved. Right. I'm not sure if delays is a good thing for the workers or employers, right? Because generally LMI is about immediate need of this temporary foreign worker to help the operations of the company, right? Exactly. I remember back in the day, the LMIs used to be 2 weeks of the processing time, and it was so fast. Right now, it's not just 8 weeks of advertisement. It's not guaranteed it's going to be 1 month. It may even be 6 months. So comparing to what you say in Quebec LMI process, it might be almost the same. But Quebec does definitely a more job of screening the employer and the candidate.
That's right. And not only that, I find that the 2-week processing time that you were speaking about, it never was here in Quebec. The shortest that I ever saw it was probably a month, maybe 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks was the shortest I've got an LMIA approved, but those 2 weeks was never a reality in Quebec because of that extra step.
Do you see Quebec changing its policies anytime soon? Do you see a lot of things been changing in the past for you in Quebec, or it's you? What's your assumption in that? Because you can tell me, let's say in the past 2 years, right, we experienced a lot of changes generally in immigration. Maybe in Quebec it was a little bit different. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. Okay. So Quebec kind of makes its own rules. They obviously have to be approved by federal because they don't have 100% control, but they do implement their own rules. And in the last 2 years, well, even if I compare it to 5 years ago, it's night and day. The program has changed completely. There's the cap came into effect in November 2024, and then the low wage and the high wage, the cutoff between both streams gets increased every year, and then you're looking at they make it harder. For example, not only does the rest of Canada, like every region that has an unemployment rate that's higher than 6%, cannot do a low wage LMIA. That goes for all of Canada. But in Quebec, they temporarily frozen low wage LMIAs for Montreal and Laval because the population crisis had gotten so much bad over there. It's like, schooling crisis, housing crisis, all these things that they're not even accepting any low wage applications for the whole greater area of Montreal and Laval. So it's something that MIFI, Quebec Immigration, came up on their own. So in return, a lot of employers were left suffering because of that, and they weren't able to renew their workers or hire new workers under low-wage jobs. So Quebec does have a lot of control, and the policies can change from one month to another, unfortunately. And we have to stay on top of it to make sure that we give the right information to our clients and to the workers to make sure they're up to date. But yeah, Quebec, it doesn't run by the same system as the rest of Canada.
And would you say that the hold on the LMIs in the greater Montreal area, is it also concerning healthcare and construction trades? Because, sometimes even in Toronto, you can still do low wage LMA despite the high unemployment rate just because you are in a healthcare organization, right?
If it could be justified, yes. If it could be justified, the employer can really provide a reason as to why they need people working in the healthcare sector or in the construction sector, yes. And they've also increased the cap, like the construction and healthcare, I'm sure it's the rest of Canada as well, they remained at 20%. But actually what they did for Quebec, for the cap purposes, they increased it for low wage to 15%, only for the purpose of keeping their current employees, not to fill those positions with new workers, but to keep their current temporary foreign workers working so they could fit in the cap. So 15% is the low wage cap for companies in Quebec, and also important to note, in rural areas. So if Montreal, Quebec City, those are not considered rural, so their cap is remaining at 10%. But in cities, and Quebec has a lot of these factories and stuff that are in smaller towns of populations less than 100,000, those are considered rural areas, and they're allowed to hire 15% of their workforce in low wage.
You know what? I was so hoping for this to be happening for Ontario. As I remember in April, they announced that 15%, right? The cap.
It was April, just this past April,
Ontario was hold their position for quite a bit, and then I believe in late June they announced that they will refuse that, so they will not accept 15%. I was so sad about this because a lot of employers did rely on it, especially rural territories like Northern Ontario, where they're truly struggling to find candidates. So it's really tough. Talking about Quebec workers who cannot extend their stay, I assume they still can change their status just by coming to another province, right?
Absolutely.
So as I understand, there is a Francophone mobility program. Unfortunately, there's no work permits that allows you to stay just with the French language in Quebec, correct?
No. We don't have those kind of provisions. If it comes to that they're having trouble hiring or possibly renewing a worker and they're forced to let them go, then they're going to look at other avenues in the international mobility sector, right? There's a lot of employers that are hiring from Peru, Colombia, and Chile, which have that accord with Canada for specific positions. Mexico, not to mention as well. So Korea is another one. Depending on the position, not all these countries have the same positions that they offer that are exempted from an LMIA. But in the fields that I work with, which is a lot of machinists, welders, mechanical engineering technicians, electrical engineering technicians, those are all eligible in the accords that we have with Colombia, Peru. Hopefully there's more accords coming to help the employers in Quebec, but unfortunately, just for the French language, no, we don't have the Francophone mobility in Quebec. Those are, as you know, those are the ones that are aimed to increase Francophone population in the rest of Canada, but Quebec doesn't have that.
Right, just talking about the Francophone mobility program, my suggestion to those who, let's say, are not falling under the certain nationality, right, because there's certain trade agreements, right, to help you with international mobility programs, maybe if they have a strong proficiency in French, specifically level 5 in speaking and listening, they could consider relocating. Let's say Ontario is right next to them, so it would not be a big move. but you also, of course, need an employer who will offer you a job offer. You need to meet the criteria of that job and meet the language criteria. And thankfully, there's this program that exists. So there's always alternative, right? For Francophone. Yeah.
And I find it pretty good, the Francophone mobility program, because the workplace doesn't necessarily have to be in French, just that their everyday life have to be in French, right? So
Correct.
they're not looking to increase the Francophone population in workplaces, but rather in the person's everyday life. They want to make sure that person is speaking French at home rather than at work. So that's what I think, that because you're not going to find French companies outside of Quebec. It's very rare. So, but that's why they're doing it. And Manitoba has a big French population. Ontario does have a French population. But so like the goal has been, the program has been very popular, and there have been quite a bit of workers that have not been able to be renewed in Quebec that eventually find an employer outside of Quebec, and they ended up going there via the Francophone mobility, which is exempted from an LMIA. An employer loves that. When you tell them that no LMIA is needed, they're like, no problem, just a work permit application, sign me up.
Right, and because LMIA takes so long to process as well, right? And it's a lot of advertisement, recruitment process, and so on. And as employer, you just need to pay $230 compliance fees, offer the job to the worker who basically gonna get a work permit valid for 2 years. And another thing that it's good in comparison, like low wage LMIs are issued only for 1 year, versus Francophone mobility program can issue you a work permit up to 2 or even 3 years, right?
3 years,
and that's amazing. Also, talking about the permanent residency in Quebec, we know we have express entry, we have provincial nominee program. That's the programs that I generally work with, let's say in Ontario and other provinces. Just for the general information, me as a licensed consultant, I do not have a license for Quebec specifically. You, Michael, have. So people have to understand when they are trying to get a permanent residency in Quebec, they need to find the right consultant for this, right? And therefore, when I'm talking about provincial program and I'm talking about the permanent residency, I cannot advise on the Quebec, but you can. So I'm asking you to provide maybe some guidance on what would be a good strategy to get a permanent residency if you intend to live in Quebec.
Well, that's to make a long story short, the last year has been very interesting in the permanent resident sector in Quebec. We used to have a program called the PEC, Programme Expérience Québécois. That program was aimed for people that have, well, obviously people that are educated in Quebec, meaning a university to get a bachelor's, master, or college certificate, or workers, where I'm going to speak about is, it was only available for workers that had a NOC 0, 1, 2, or 3. But and it was a direct application. It was not based on points like express entry. As long as they had 2 years of work experience and they had a level 7 French in speaking and listening, then they were eligible for the program. But unfortunately, Quebec wants to reduce the number of permanent residents that they bring in per year. So right now, what they did is they closed the PREC program, and there was a big uproar. There was protests. There were all kinds of employers and members of parliament trying to act on their constituents to make sure that they could reopen the program. And MIFI did reopen the program, but only for people that have accumulated 2 years of work experience by the date of November 19th, 2025. So if you did not accumulate those 2 years of work experience by that date, you have no choice but to go with the other program. And the other program is called the PSTQ, the Programme Spécialisé des Travailleurs Qualifiés. And that program is for all NOCs. That's what I like about it. It doesn't discriminate against NOC 4 and 5, right?
Yes.
So all NOCs are eligible. You have stream 1, which is for NOC 0, 1, 2, and 3, which you have to have a minimum of 1 year work experience, and as well as a level 7 French in all 4 categories. Whereas a NOC 4 and 5 also needs 1 year work experience, but needs a level 5 in French in all 4 categories. So they brought the language requirement down for NOC 4 and 5. And also it's pretty similar to Express Entry. Quebec moved to a system that's based on points on age, education, work experience, and language proficiency. So and it's pretty much doing the same thing. Instead of your profile that you place into the pool of candidates, Quebec calls it a declaration of interest, where you make your whole profile, you submit all the information, and you're placed into the pool of candidates waiting to be selected. And it's proven to be pretty successful so far. There's people even in NOC 5 that are being selected to apply for permanent residency, which Canada's counterpart in Express Entry, as you know, it's only good for 0, 1, 2, 3. It doesn't include 4 and 5. So even people that come here and work the the more manual jobs or the more physical jobs, as in packager or a general worker at a warehouse, they're still eligible. Yeah, they're still eligible for permanent residency through the new program, the PSTQ program, just as long as they can meet the level 5 French requirements in all 4 categories.
Can the applicant apply for express entry while being in Quebec? That's the question.
Yeah, that's I get that a lot. And I get that from people who have a very hard time learning French. And so a person will come here, they'll work under French. Quebec, the government of Quebec gives free French lessons, not only free, but they'll also pay you. They'll pay the person $150 per session to attend a French course so they could get to the French that they require. But a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but some people do have difficulty getting that level of French. So they come to me and they say, like, look, I can't get it, but I want to be a PR. What can I do? I always tell them express entry. Express entry is 100% possible. You just present an English language rather than a French language if you can't get that. But it comes with a caveat. You have to prove that you're settled outside of Quebec by the time the PR application is finalized. So
you can't be intending to live in Quebec. You have to settle outside.
You have to settle outside. So you could start, an applicant can start the express entry profile from within Quebec. They could be placed into the pool of candidates from within Quebec. They could even be selected, get an ITA, an invitation to apply from within Quebec, and apply from within Quebec. That's no problem. But during the processing of the application, they're going to get a procedural fairness letter. And it sounds scary, but ultimately it just says that you need to prove to us that you are now permanently living outside of Quebec so we could approve your permanent residence application. And I always advise my clients, I'm like, whenever you submit the PR application and it's done, you start focusing on moving province and not just lease moving province, but
utility bills,
everything, bank statements, phone bills, utility bills, lease agreement, everything has to be located. And I always recommend to go to Ottawa or in Ontario because it's closest to Quebec. And I've had many people do it successfully. And some people stay there for a couple of years and they end up coming back to Quebec. Some people ended up staying there permanently and they built their life in Ontario. So it's a matter of personal preference, but yes, it's possible to gain the work experience in Quebec and still apply for express entry, but just as long as you're ready to be settled outside of Quebec permanently.
My question for you, so if you apply for a Quebec PR program versus express entry, what is faster? Because let's say if you got a CLB 7, right, in each ability in French, technically selection criteria in express entry is pretty low. It's around 400 that you get invited with, right? So when you get invited, average time, let's say 6 months after you submitted your application, which is pretty reasonable. Would you say the processing time is similar in Quebec PR application or it's longer?
It's longer. The reason it's longer is because you have that extra step. Once again, Quebec is choosing its own immigrants. So when you go into the PSTQ program and you get selected, you could submit your application. The selection would also depend on the profile of the candidate, like if they have a weak French or they don't have enough work experience and stuff like that. So that's possible that they might be waiting for a couple of months before they're selected. But once they're selected, they submit their CSQ application, and the CSQ is the counterpart to the CAQ. So the CAQ is for temporary residence for students and workers, but the CSQ, Certificat de Sélection de Québec, is for permanent residents. Just that takes 6 months to be processed. And then once the worker gets a CSQ, then he applies for permanent residence via the Quebec Skilled Worker Program with Canada. So we're looking at 6 months CSQ, another 6, 8, 12 months PR with IRCC. So as one downside about immigrating through Quebec is that your process will be longer. But Canada has put in provisions for, I guess you could say, protecting the status of the worker. Like, for example, just recently, PSTQ's CSQ application was taking very long. And as you know, people who are applying for PR are eligible for a bridge work permit, right?
Yes.
But, well, whether it's going to be employer-specific or non-employer-specific, that depends on the person's situation. But because Quebec was taking so long with the CSQs to process, Canada said, we're going to give bridge work permits to people who are waiting for their CSQ to be processed. So now, instead of having a PR application in process being eligible for a bridge permit, at this point now Canada also implemented a new LMIA exemption code that allows CSQ applicants that are waiting for their CSQ to apply to extend their work permit. So it's been very successful so far. It is. Pretty generous. Look, this all came into effect, honestly, because Quebec did drop the ball. I'm not afraid to say it. And it's been known publicly. They did drop the ball when they made all those changes, and especially when closing the PEC and only obliging everyone to go through the PSTQ. And by doing that, there was a lot of people that were stuck, and Quebec and Canada was forced to step in. They were forced to use their power as a country to overstep a province and let them know, like, look, what you guys did are wrong. We're going to implement a new LMIA exemption code for people that are waiting for the CSQ, so their work permit doesn't expire and they're out of status.
It's very interesting because this program sounds to me like a provincial program, right? Let's say if Ontario nominee program was implemented, let's say you submitted your application for nomination. Generally, in Ontario, you cannot use the proof of submission of, let's say, ONP to extend your stay, right? You only need the nomination as it is, and then you can apply for a work permit. Here, I see that in this program, while you're waiting for this application, you can apply for open work permit, right? And it can help you to extend the stay while you're waiting for it.
It's not going to be an open work permit. It's going to be it's an employer-specific work permit. So it still has to go through the job offer, and the employer has to pay the employer compliance fee of $230. But it's people that have an open work permit are eligible to remain with an open work permit if they're applying for their PSTQ, CSQ. But people with a closed work permit applying for their CSQ must remain with a closed work permit for that company that they're applying for.
Yeah, I see. Okay, but that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's very interesting, to be honest, and I think it creates it gives you a lot of options, because you can get like CLB7 in each ability, right? In French, you may consider going through the PR process in Quebec, but you have all these steps to look at, or you can consider submitting your profile in Express Entry, maybe being selected sooner, but you have to look into settlements into another province, right? Because you can get the procedural fairness letter.
Nothing is stopping a worker in Canada from applying to both programs, right? They could have a declaration of interest active for the PSTQ program and an express entry profile active for the federal program, because it's not technically a PR application. So they could have themselves in the candidates in the pool of both systems. Even if the person got selected to apply for their CSQ via the PSTQ program, they could still have their express entry profile active, because the CSQ program is not technically a federal PR program, right? So in this case, if the person is applying and they want to have their most opportunities open, I'll advise them, I'm like, nothing is stopping you from also applying to express entry, but it comes with the warning that if you do get selected for express entry and you want to choose to follow that path, you have to be okay with moving out of Quebec.
I feel like even it's really important to notice, because I've done many express entry applications, and I know there's this question where you intend to reside. You may not maybe select a specific province, but there's like all provinces, and maybe my advice will be to select that instead, right? Just to avoid any contradictions between the PR in Quebec and PR federal file and express entry, right? I think that would be the safest check mark to do in the express entries.
I agree 100%. That's the best way to do it, just to not to leave yourself, even though the express entry, it says like it's not final, you could change this later. It's just to make them know that you didn't make up your mind and you have that, you're open to moving to any province. But when an applicant got their CSQ and they're applying for federal PR, there's a form that the applicant has to sign. It's a declaration to reside in Quebec. And that's part of that's part of one of the forms that they have to submit, because once it's approved, it's just pretty much letting Canada know that I'm not changing provinces. I'm going to be here for a minimum of 2 years.
I feel it's all about where you actually intend to live, right? So if you are settled in Quebec and you have your, let's say, open work permit or closed work permit, and you're just waiting for that permanent residency, I guess Quebec PR pathway is just right for you. You don't have to hustle back and forth from one province to another. Exactly. You can just settle and just wait for your permanent residency. If you intend to live in Ontario, Alberta, Manitoba, there's obviously provincial nominee programs, there's express entry that you can actually use in order to get your status there, right? And it all comes to the strategies. That's why my advice to whoever's listening is to make sure that you look at all options, pick cons and pros. In the end of the day, it's really hard to predict, right? Because immigration right now is so, I don't want to say unstable, but it's very unpredictable in the sense that I even don't know what to expect from it, right?
Exactly.
Because it all changes. I know that currently we get a lot of news that we have to decrease number of people coming in, but at the same time, I hear news where the birth rates are really low. We need immigration. A lot of employers are struggling to find foreign workers, despite the youth unemployment rate, despite our inability with the housing market. We still need immigration, and that's why I think it's always good to have backup options. So even though, let's say, you go with a Quebec PR, maybe considering Express Entry at the same time is also good, right? My suggestion is to the clients, let's say, who maybe are not in Quebec, is to study French, right? Because if you don't have LMIA, right, as we spoke, you can maybe apply with a Francophone mobility program. On this note, what would be your final advice to our listeners? What would you suggest to newcomers or anyone who's listening to this podcast?
Probably one of the biggest things I try to advise people is to get the right information. I'm sure you deal with this a lot, is that people will come to you and they say, my WhatsApp group, my Telegram group, my Facebook group said that I can do this, or I could do that, and I don't need a work permit, or I don't need a study permit, or anything like that. Or I could apply for this permanent residence stream without having to need this document or that experience. And I always tell them, like, look, if you're getting information from WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups that are made by a random person, then you're probably not getting the right information. So information will help an applicant or a candidate that wants to immigrate to Canada permanently to know all their options and to go through the right way. And because the last thing they want to do is do something that they're not allowed to do, which is going to affect them down the road. Maybe IRCC will not find out about it now, but eventually they will. Nothing is hidden forever. So my advice is to get the right information. IRCC website is very user-friendly. I never really had an issue with it. It's just taking the patience and the time to navigate it to get the information. And in Quebec, same thing with MIFI website, Quebec Immigration. It has all the information there, but it's only in French. So that's the problem. That's the problem that a lot of people like. There might be a few pages in English as an introductory to let you know about the program, but once you get into the details of the program, all the web pages are in French and there are no English pages to refer to. So it's just a matter of getting the right information and making sure you're doing the right thing, because you don't want to, an applicant doesn't want to negatively impact their chances of permanently residing in Canada. And that all starts with information.
And just to add to this, I will say on the right time, because if you're coming to that conclusion that you have to extend your work permit just even a month before your work permit expiry, I think it's a mistake. You have to think way in advance, right?
100%. But that's good information, more closer to the lawyer, to the employers, right?
Yeah.
To the employers to let them know that the workers have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so both employer and if you're looking for the LMI specific or a job specific work permit, right? You definitely need to coordinate that with employer, because honestly, I have tons of people coming to me last minute, and I'm like, I wish you came to me at least 6 months before, right? At least 6 months. I would say even 8 months right now is a reasonable time to start looking into it. Anyways, I have lightning rounds for you. So this is like something I do every podcast, and you just have to answer the question really fast without thinking. So if I ask coffee or tea, you have to say coffee, let's say, or tea, right?
All right.
So let's go. Coffee or tea?
Coffee, espresso.
Montreal bagel or poutine?
Poutine.
Poutine. Okay. City life or quiet countryside?
Quiet countryside.
I think I knew that answer for you, right? Early morning or late night?
Late night. Yeah.
Oh wow. I'm an early morning person. I need to get everything.
I struggle to go to bed sometimes because I think it's too early.
Oh wow. Phone call or email?
Email. All the way.
We live in the Gen Z society now, where you must email me first before getting this phone call.
I think it's, for me, it's a matter of, because I'm sure you could relate, you're not always available, right? And if I'm in the middle of a meeting, I'm not answering someone's phone call because my time is dedicated to that person. But an email, I could answer as soon as possible, but at least you're going to get an answer, right? So I always prefer email. Yeah.
And what I like about emails, it's all in writing. So client cannot say, you didn't tell me this, right? Because over the phone, you can't really prove yourself that you explain everything to a client. In the email, it's all perfect.
I think we've all been there where we had to go back in old emails and say, look, it was right there.
Exactly. I explained it. And it's good for us as consultants to always protect ourselves that we did provide a right consultation, right? Employer case or individual case?
Employer case.
I actually like employer case as well. Individual case, nothing wrong with this, but it might be a little bit more complex. Employers programs are quite probably limited, I would say.
And they also, I find that employers are also quicker to provide you with what you need. Whereas like we need documents from employers and whatnot, whereas workers or individuals, getting the documents from them sometimes, not all the time, but 10-15% of the time is almost like pulling teeth, like coming and chasing them and reminding them, or like reminding them about deadlines. But companies, they put that in their agenda, they know what to do, and they're so much more easier to deal with.
Sometimes we have clients, like we send several emails with the document checklist, and then they send everything in one day, let's say, they expect you, and then they send an email, did you submit it?
Yeah, exactly.
right on the same day. I'm like, no.
No, it takes it takes work. It takes some time. 100%. It takes some time, but it's refreshing to know that there are many employers out there that they will cooperate with you, because you like anyone who hires a consultant to or retains a consultant to do an application. It's a project that's cooperation based. Like I cannot go into your office and gather your tax documents for you. I cannot produce an employment attestation for the worker you want to renew, right? So it's that's why I find employers, they're much more easy to work with, and they're much quicker to reply.
Correct. And generally, if like a client comes as their employer, I think it's really important to have all the three parties cooperate with each other to make sure everything is consistent, correct, and done on timely manner, right? Because sometimes I have a client and the employer is busy, or vice versa, right? And you need to make sure that the deadlines are met, right? Because in the end of the day, they will probably come to you and why it's not submitted. So
100%.
So just like a few more questions. One long vacation or several short trips?
Several short trips.
You know why I can relate to you about this? Because I hate to be away for too long, because I don't want to be coming back to thousands of emails. And even on the smallest trips, I have to check it all the time because it's so sensitive.
You know that being the owner of an immigration firm, you don't really get a vacation, right? You don't, like my laptop travels with me everywhere I go, even if it's for pleasure. Like last year we went to Italy, and I was working at least a couple of hours a day just to answer emails and serve my clients. So but I also prefer the shorter, because it breaks up the year. Like instead of going somewhere for 2-3 weeks or a month, I would rather have like 4 or 5 days in January than 4 or 5 days in April. So it breaks up the year in little pieces, and you have something to look forward to as well.
Exactly, I can agree, and at least it's like I always talk to my family and friends about their vacation, and I say, I have to go on vacation, because if I stay and take 2-3 days off in Toronto, I'll still be working, because there's no way.
You have to get out of the city.
Yeah. So best advice: plan early or stay flexible?
Plan early. I think that's the immigration consultant in me. Like you were talking about like renewing your work permit 6 to 8 months in advance. I used to be like more flexible and more spontaneous, but now I just find in the last 5-6 years that I want to have everything planned ahead of time, or like even the smallest thing, I want to know what time I'm leaving the house the next day to make sure I'm getting to that point on time. So definitely plan early.
I also agree with you. It was the new environment that we're in, right? It's just so intense. You have to be always super active. You have to manage. Even for my friends, I send the calendar invites. It just became so hectic that you want to make sure that you don't miss deadlines. And you, as a immigration consultants, we go through different learning process, right? We understand that we need to make sure that the client's case is done on time and we don't miss deadlines. And if you do, it's not pleasant, right? So you want to make sure you don't miss it. And everyone is a human and they can make mistakes, but at least we are in the digital world right now, where you have your calendar, you have your AI, and it helps you to manage your time better.
Definitely, 100%.
On this note, I want to thank you, Michael, for your time today, and it was a pleasure talking about Quebec immigration. I do advise everyone who is looking to or intends to live in Quebec to come to you for a temporary work permit or a permanent residency. I think you will be a perfect person to talk about it. You have years of experience in this, just wanted to thank you again, and let's hope we were helpful for those who are listening to us.
Definitely. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on. It was a really good time, and it's good to get that information about Quebec out, because it's not something that people know as much as federal immigration. Federal immigration is widely known, whereas Quebec, it's very more specific. So I'm glad to provide the information, and thank you for allowing this opportunity to spread this information.
Awesome.